Welcome to Verified Fears. There's a road up here where night never fully lifts, and even the air can feel like a living thing. If you ever find yourself driving through thick, unblinking fog in the Pacific Northwest, just know you're not alone in what you see or what follows behind your headlights. Tonight, you'll hear about impossible mile markers that repeat, voices on the radio counting down your final moments, faces you prayed you'd never see again, staring out from the mist. These are stories of the forgotten, the lost, and the hunted. Harrowing encounters along haunted roads where the fog hides more than it reveals. What you're about to experience will make every late drive feel different, and every low cloud a reason to hesitate before turning the key. And if you reach the end, still doubting, try remembering what the fog looks like before sunrise. Do you trust what you hear in the hush? If you crave fear, you've found the right channel. Settle in, subscribe, and tap the bell. After all, when the mist closes in, you'll want at least one warning before something reaches you first. This is Verified Fears, where unsettling truths drift thicker than fog and you decide how deep you're willing to drive. I've driven Highway 101 1,000 times. I know every curve, every marker, every mile. 23 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler will do that to you. The road becomes muscle memory, something you feel in your bones rather than think about. So when I passed mile 167 for the fourth time in a row, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with the world. It started normal enough. I'd left Portland around 6 in the evening, hauling a load of electronics down to Sacramento. The weather report mentioned fog rolling in along the coast. But that's nothing unusual for November in Oregon. I've driven through worse. By the time I hit the Cape Perpetua stretch, the fog had gotten thick. The kind that turns your headlights into useless glowing orbs that barely cut 3 feet ahead. I slowed down to about 35, which annoyed me because I was already behind schedule. But you don't mess around with coastal fog. I've seen too many cars at the bottom of cliffs to take chances. Mile marker 167 appeared in my headlights like it always does. Just a green reflective sign on a white post. I noted it without really thinking about it, the way you notice your own breathing. Then about 5 minutes later, I saw it again. Same marker, same post, same exact placement. My first thought was that the highway department had screwed up and put 2 markers with the same number on the same stretch of road. It happens sometimes with rural highway maintenance. I made a mental note to report it and kept driving. But then I saw it a third time. And that's when the confusion started turning into something else. Something cold that settled in my stomach like I'd swallowed ice water. I pulled over, or at least I tried to. The shoulder was narrow here, barely wide enough for my rig, but I managed to get most of the way off the road. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at that mile marker in my mirror. The fog moved around it in slow, thick waves, but the marker itself stayed perfectly still, perfectly clear. I grabbed my phone to check my GPS, but there was no signal. That wasn't surprising. Cell coverage is spotty along this stretch. But my GPS should still show my location even without a signal. Instead, the screen showed a blue dot on a gray line. No details, no mile markers, no indication of where I actually was. Just a dot on a line, going nowhere. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe I'd gotten turned around somehow without realizing it. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn in the fog and doubled back. But I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't turned. I hadn't even changed lanes. The road had been straight for miles, and I'd been driving forward the entire time. There was no physical way I could be passing the same marker over and over, unless... And this is where my mind started rejecting what my eyes were telling me. Unless something was very, very wrong with the road itself. I put the truck back in gear and started driving again. I kept my eyes locked on the odometer, watching the tenths of a mile tick by. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And then, right at what should have been mile 170, there it was again. Mile marker 167. Same marker, same post. And that's when I noticed something else. Something that made my hands start shaking on the wheel. The fog looked different. When I'd first passed the marker, it had been evening fog, thick and gray, but still holding some daylight. Now it was darker, duskier, like the sun had set while I was driving those 3 miles. But that was impossible. 3 miles doesn't take long enough for sunset. I stopped the truck again, right there in the middle of the lane. Nobody was behind me. I hadn't seen another vehicle since the fog rolled in. So I just sat there, engine running, trying to understand what was happening. The fog pressed against my windows like it had weight, like it was trying to get in. I could hear my own breathing, loud and fast in the cab's silence. My CB radio was dead static. My phone still showed no signal. The GPS still showed that useless blue dot going nowhere. That's when I decided to walk. I know it sounds stupid, leaving the safety of my truck in dense fog on a highway. But I needed to understand. I needed to see that mile marker up close. Needed to confirm it was real and not some hallucination brought on by too many energy drinks and not enough sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The moment my boots hit the pavement, I knew something was deeply wrong. The air felt thick, not just with fog, but with something else. Something I can't quite describe. It was like the air had texture, like I was walking through something more solid than vapor. I walked toward where the markers should be, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the fog. I counted my steps. 20, 30, 40. I should have reached it by now. I should have walked past it. But there was nothing. Just road and fog and that horrible thick feeling in the air. I turned around and walked back toward my truck, counting again. When I reached what should have been my truck, there was nothing there. Just empty road. I spun around, my flashlight cutting useless arcs through the fog, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My truck was gone. 40 tons of steel and cargo vanished into fog that shouldn't be able to hide something that large. I started running then. Panic overriding logic. I ran back the way I'd come, or at least the way I thought I'd come, my boots pounding on asphalt I could barely see. And then, suddenly, there was light ahead. Red light, tail lights, my truck. I ran to it and grabbed the door handle like it was a lifeline, hauling myself back into the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key, but the engine was already running. Had I left it running? I couldn't remember. I threw it into gear and started driving, not caring anymore about understanding, just wanting to get away from that marker, away from whatever was happening on this stretch of road. But of course, 3 miles later, there it was again. Mile marker 167. Only this time, the fog wasn't dusk dark. It was night dark, full dark. The kind of darkness that shouldn't exist at, I checked my dashboard clock, 7:47 p.m. It should still be evening, should still have some light in the sky. But outside my windows was nothing but darkness and fog and that marker, always that marker. I don't know how many times I passed it after that. I lost count. Each time the world outside changed slightly. Once, the fog had a reddish tint, like it was lit from below by something I couldn't see. Once, I swear the trees on either side of the road were closer than they should be, their branches reaching over the pavement like fingers. Once, and this is the one that almost made me drive off the road, there was something standing next to the marker. Not a person, not exactly. The shape was wrong, too tall and too thin, and it turned its head to watch my truck pass, but I couldn't see a face, just a blank expanse where a face should be. I tried everything. I tried driving in reverse. The marker still appeared ahead of me after 3 miles. I tried closing my eyes and counting to 100, hoping it was exhaustion playing tricks. I tried praying, even though I haven't prayed since I was a kid. Nothing worked. The marker kept appearing, and the world outside kept changing, becoming stranger and more wrong with each pass. And then, on what must have been the 15th or 20th loop, something changed. The fog started to thin, not all at once, but gradually, like someone was slowly turning up the world's brightness. I could see farther ahead, could make out the shape of the road curving away into the distance. And there, maybe a quarter mile ahead, I saw another mile marker, 168. I accelerated, not caring about the fog anymore, not caring about safe driving, just needing to reach that marker, to pass it, to break free of whatever loop had held me. The marker grew closer, 150 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards. And then I was past it. And there ahead was another marker, 169. And I laughed, actually laughed with relief, even though I was crying at the same time. The fog cleared completely about 5 miles later. Suddenly, I was just driving down Highway 101 on a clear November night. Stars visible overhead, my headlights cutting clean, bright paths ahead of me. My GPS flickered back to life, showing me exactly where I was, mile 173, just south of Cape Perpetua. My phone showed a signal again. My CB radio crackled with normal truck driver chatter. Everything was normal. Except I'd lost 4 hours. When I pulled into a rest stop 20 miles later and checked my logbook against my dashboard clock, 4 hours were just gone. I'd entered that fog at 6:45 p.m. It was now 11:15 p.m. For me, it had felt like maybe an hour and a half. But 4 hours had passed in the real world while I was trapped in that loop, passing that marker over and over, watching the world outside change with each pass. I didn't file a report. What would I say? I didn't tell my dispatcher why I was late. I just blamed the fog, which wasn't technically a lie. I've driven Highway 101 dozens of times since then, always during daylight, never at night, and never when fog is in the forecast. And I never, ever slow down when I pass mile marker 167. I keep my eyes straight ahead and my foot steady on the gas until I'm well past 170, because I don't know what I'd see if I looked too closely. I don't know if that loop is still there, waiting in the fog, waiting for someone to get caught in it again. And I don't want to find out. The fog moved wrong. I noticed it immediately. After 6 years working these mountains, you develop an eye for weather patterns. Fog rolls, it drifts, it settles into valleys, and clings to cold surfaces. But fog doesn't pulse. Fog doesn't breathe. Yet there I was, 3 miles deep on Forest Road 25 near Mount St. Helens, watching the white wall ahead of me expand and contract in perfect rhythm, like watching someone's chest rise and fall during sleep. I'm a Forest Service maintenance worker which means I spend most of my time alone on roads people don't even know exist, checking for storm damage, clearing debris, making sure the gates and barriers are secure. It's solitary work, but I've always preferred it that way. Trees don't complain, and mountains don't play office politics. That morning, I'd been sent to assess road conditions after a heavy November storm had blown through the night before. My supervisor mentioned possible washouts near the old growth section, so I loaded my truck with cones and caution tape and headed up before dawn. The fog had been normal when I started. Thick, sure, but normal. Mountain fog that hugged the ground and turned the forest into something out of a fairy tale. I'd driven through it slowly, windows cracked so I could hear if any trees had come down across the road. Everything seemed fine until I reached the section where the road curves along that steep ravine. The one where the old-growth Douglas firs are so massive, you feel like an ant crawling past their roots. That's when I first saw it. The fog ahead wasn't just sitting there. It was moving, breathing, in and out, expanding maybe 10 or 15 feet with each pulse, then contracting back. Regular as a heartbeat, regular as breath. I stopped my truck right there in the middle of the road and watched it for a solid minute, trying to find a rational explanation. Wind patterns, maybe. Some weird temperature differential creating convection currents. But the air was completely still. Not even a whisper of breeze. And the fog kept pulsing, kept breathing, completely independent of anything that should make fog move. I grabbed my thermos of coffee and took a long drink, thinking maybe I was more tired than I'd realized. But when I looked again, it was still happening. Still breathing. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct I had that wasn't pure curiosity was screaming at me to back up, turn around, and report the road as impassable. But 6 years of scientific training and natural resource management had taught me to observe, to document, to understand before reacting. So I put my truck in gear and drove slowly forward, toward the breathing fog, telling myself I just needed to get a closer look, to understand what was causing this phenomenon. As I got closer, I realized the pulsing wasn't just in front of me. It was all around me. The fog to my left, to my right, behind me, all of it moving in perfect synchronization, expanding, contracting, breathing. And now that I was inside it, I could feel it too. Each time the fog expanded, the air pressure changed slightly. I felt it in my ears, in my chest, like being inside a massive lung. The truck's engine started running rough, sputtering slightly with each contraction of the fog, like it was struggling to breathe too. Then my engine died. Just stopped, right there on the road with no warning. My dash lights flickered and went dark. I turned the key, pumping the gas, but got nothing except a clicking sound that seemed pathetically small against the huge silence of the forest. And in that silence, I heard it. A sound so deep I felt it more than heard it. A low, rhythmic rumble that matched the pulsing of the fog. Something vast was breathing, and I was inside it. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to restart the engine and failing each time. The fog had gotten thicker, pressing against my windows until I could barely see 5 feet in any direction. And the breathing sound was getting louder, more present, like whatever was making it was becoming more aware, more awake. That's when the fear really hit me. Not the intellectual kind where you recognize danger, but the ancient kind, the kind that lives in your brainstem and remembers when humans were prey. I needed to get out of there, and if my truck wouldn't start, I'd walk. I grabbed my radio to call it in before I abandoned the vehicle, but when I keyed the mic, All I got was static underscored by that deep, rhythmic rumble. I tried different channels, same thing. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual up here. But something about it felt more absolute than normal, like the fog was blocking more than just cellular waves. I was completely cut off. I stuffed my phone in my pocket anyway, grabbed my flashlight and emergency pack, and opened the door. The moment I stepped out of the truck, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The air was thick, almost resistant, like trying to move through water. Each breath I took felt heavy, saturated, like I was breathing in more than just oxygen and water vapor. And the breathing sound was everywhere now, coming from the ground, from the trees, from the sky, from inside my own chest. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the fog. And that's when I saw the trees. They were moving. Not swaying like trees do in wind. There was still no wind, but rising and falling, their massive trunks expanding and contracting in rhythm with the fog. The bark was rippling like skin over muscle. Roots that had been buried were now visible at the surface, writhing slowly like exposed veins. The entire forest was breathing. Every tree, every branch, every needle was part of one massive respiratory system. And I was standing in the middle of it. I backed toward my truck, my hand fumbling for the door handle, but I couldn't look away from the trees. The old-growth Douglas firs that I'd measured and documented and protected for 6 years weren't separate organisms at all. They were organs, components, parts of something so incomprehensibly large that my mind kept trying to reject what my eyes were showing me. The fog wasn't fog. It was exhalation. The breathing sound wasn't coming from something in the forest. It was coming from the forest itself, or from something the forest was part of, something that used trees as lungs and roots as circulatory systems, and fog as breath. My hand found the door handle, and I yanked it open, throwing myself back into the driver's seat. I turned the key with shaking hands, whispering prayers to gods I didn't believe in, and miracle of miracles, the engine caught. It sputtered and coughed, struggling against whatever was happening in the air. But it ran. I threw it into reverse and started backing down the road. Too terrified to try turning around, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, watching the breathing fog recede. But as I backed away, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes, despite every instinct telling me to keep moving. Through a gap in the fog, up on the mountainside above the tree line, something was moving. Something massive. I only saw it for a second before the fog closed back in. But that second burned itself into my memory with perfect clarity. It was the same gray-white color as the fog. And it was rising, a dome or curve or back of something so large that the entire section of forest I'd been standing in was just a small part of it. The trees weren't growing on ground. They were growing on it, whatever it was. I don't remember much of the drive back. I know I went faster than I should have, my truck fishtailing on the rough road, branches scraping the sides. I know I was crying, though I didn't realize it until I reached the paved highway and saw my face in the mirror. I know the breathing sound followed me for miles, getting quieter but never quite disappearing. Until finally, when I was almost back to the ranger station, it faded completely, and the fog lifted, and the world became normal again. I filed a report saying the road was impassable due to fallen trees, which was a lie. I requested a transfer to a different district, which was granted. I never went back to that road, never wanted to see those trees again. But sometimes, on foggy mornings, I'll see mist moving in a parking lot or a park, and for just a second, it looks like it's pulsing, breathing. And I'll remember that there are things in these mountains older and larger than we have words for. Things that use entire forests as organs. Things that we walk on and through and past every day without ever realizing we're standing on something alive. The worst part isn't what I saw. The worst part is knowing that it's still there, still breathing, still alive, and that somewhere, on some abandoned logging road deep in the Gifford Pin Show, my truck sat for 3 days before another crew found it and wondered why I'd abandoned it with the engine running and the door hanging open. They never asked me directly, but I heard through the grapevine that when they found it, the entire truck was covered in a thin film of moisture, like condensation. Like something had breathed on it. Like something had exhaled. He was exactly where hitchhikers shouldn't be. 30 miles from the nearest town, standing in fog so thick I almost hit him. And when he smiled at me through the window, I made the worst decision of my life. I unlocked the door. I was driving home for Thanksgiving break, my first time making the trip from Seattle to my parents' place in Wenatchee alone. Usually, I caught a ride with friends, but everyone had left the day before, and I'd stayed late to finish a paper. By the time I got on Highway 20 heading east through the North Cascades, it was already past 7 and getting dark. The weather report hadn't mentioned fog, but weather reports don't mean much once you get into the mountains. The fog had rolled in somewhere around Marble Mount, and by the time I was climbing toward Washington Pass, I could barely see the road. I wasn't scared. Not really. 20 years old and convinced I was invincible the way all college kids are. I had a full tank of gas, a decent car, and 4-wheel drive if I needed it. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. And I was actually enjoying the solitude, the way the fog made everything feel insulated and quiet, like driving through a cloud. I had music playing, some indie band my roommate had gotten me into, and I was thinking about my mom's cooking and how good it would feel to sleep in my old bed. That's when my headlights caught him. Just a figure standing on the shoulder, thumb out, appearing so suddenly in the fog that I slammed on my brakes and felt my car slide slightly on the damp pavement. My heart was hammering as I stopped about 20 feet past him, watching in my rearview mirror as he walked toward my car. He was wearing a thick jacket and a baseball cap, hands stuffed in his pockets, moving with the casual confidence of someone who'd been hitchhiking for years. When he reached my passenger window, he leaned down and smiled. And something about that smile made me hesitate for just a second before I hit the unlock button. "Thank God," he said as he climbed in, bringing the smell of wet earth and pine. "I've been out here for 2 hours. You're the first car I've seen." He was probably in his 40s, with a weathered face and tired eyes, the kind of guy who looked like he'd lived a hard life but wasn't dangerous. Just down on his luck. "Heading east?" he asked, and when I nodded, his smile got wider. "Perfect. I just need to get to Mazama. My truck broke down back at the turnoff and my phone's dead." "You're literally saving my life here." I told him it was no problem, that I was glad to help, and pulled back onto the highway. The fog seemed even thicker now, pressing against the windshield until I had to lean forward to see the road. He was quiet for the first few minutes, just sitting there looking out at the fog, and I started to relax. Just a guy who needed a ride. Nothing weird about it. But then he spoke again, and something in his voice made my hands tighten on the wheel. "You're going to want to slow down in about half a mile," he said. "There's a sharp curve coming up and the shoulder's washed out. Saw a car go off there about a month ago." I slowed down, and sure enough, there was the curve, sharper than I'd expected, with orange cones and caution tape marking where the shoulder had collapsed. I navigated it carefully, and he nodded with satisfaction. Good. Most people take that too fast, especially in fog like this. Can't see it until you're right on top of it. How do you know this road so well? I asked, trying to make conversation, trying to ignore the small voice in my head that was starting to whisper warnings. I've been up and down it more times than I can count, he said. You learn every inch of a road when you drive it enough. Every curve, every danger spot, every place where things can go wrong. He paused, then added, in about 3 miles, there's a pullout on the right. You're going to want to stop there. Why? The word came out more defensive than I'd intended. Trust me, he said. And that smile was back. But it looked different now in the dim glow of my dashboard lights. Wider. There's something you need to see. Something important. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct was telling me to keep driving, to get this guy to Mazama and get him out of my car. But he was watching me now. Really watching me. And I realized with a creeping sense of dread that I'd let a complete stranger into my car in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea what he was capable of. So I said, okay. I said I'd stop, and I saw his shoulders relax like he'd been tense, like he'd been preparing for me to refuse. The pullout appeared exactly where he said it would, a small cleared area barely visible through the fog. I pulled in and put the car in park, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, ready to floor it if I needed to. What am I supposed to see? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He pointed out the windshield, into the fog. Look closely. You'll see it in a minute. I looked. There was nothing but white fog and the dark shapes of trees. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Nothing. I was about to tell him I was leaving when he spoke again, and his voice had changed. It was lower now, more controlled, like someone who dropped a mask they'd been wearing. I've been doing this for a long time, he said quietly. Longer than you've been alive. And I've learned that people are most vulnerable when they think they're being helped. When they think someone's looking out for them. They stop paying attention to the important things. They stop questioning. He turned to look at me fully, and in the faint light, I could see his eyes were wrong. Too bright, too focused. You trusted me because I gave you good advice. I warned you about the curve. I was helpful. And because I was helpful, you stopped wondering why I was out here, 30 miles from anything, in fog that came out of nowhere. My hand moved toward the door handle, but he was faster. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. Don't, he said softly. Not yet. You haven't seen it yet. The thing I told you to watch for. It's almost here. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. With my free hand, I fumbled for my phone, but he plucked it out of my grasp almost casually and tossed it into the back seat. You won't need that. No signal up here anyway. I made sure of that. He was still looking out the windshield, still watching the fog. Any second now. You'll want to pay attention. This is the important part. And then I saw them. Lights in the fog. Multiple sets of headlights approaching from the direction we'd come. Relief flooded through me. Other cars, other people, help. But the relief died immediately when I saw how the lights were moving. They were perfectly synchronized, maintaining exact distances from each other, moving at exactly the same speed. 4 cars, then 5, then 6. All identical dark shapes in the fog, all moving in formation. "What is this?" My voice came out as a whisper. "They've been behind us since you picked me up," he said conversationally. "Following at a distance, waiting for me to get you to stop. You thought you were alone on this road, but you haven't been alone since Marble Mount. They've been patient, they've been careful, and now they're here." The vehicles pulled into the pullout, boxing my car in from behind and both sides. Their headlights stayed on, creating a cage of light that made it impossible to see who or what was in them. My door locks clicked down, and I realized with horror that he must have hit the master lock. I was trapped. Why? It was all I could think to say, all my mind could process. Why me? He finally released my wrist and sat back in his seat, looking almost relaxed. Why not you? You were driving alone, at night, in fog, on an empty road. You stopped for a stranger. You trusted easily. You did everything right to end up here. He glanced at me, and for just a moment, something almost like pity crossed his face. For what it's worth, you seem like a nice kid. Under different circumstances, maybe I would have actually helped you. But these aren't different circumstances. One of the vehicles behind us flashed its lights twice. Some kind of signal. He nodded and reached for his door handle. "They'll take it from here," he said. "I've done my part. I got you to stop. That's all they needed." He opened the door, and the fog rolled in, thick and cold. Before he stepped out, he turned back one more time. "Advice, though? Don't try to run. They're much faster than they look, and the fog goes on forever up here. You just die tired." Then he was gone, disappearing into the fog between the vehicles. I heard doors opening behind me, heard footsteps on gravel, heard low voices conferring in words I couldn't quite make out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I looked at the gear shift, still in park, looked at my doors, still locked from the inside. But I could unlock them, could throw the car in reverse, could try to ram my way out. But then faces appeared at my windows. Not quite human faces, though they were close enough to make my brain stutter trying to process them. Two wide smiles, eyes that reflected the dashboard light like an animal's. Fingers that were just slightly too long, pressing against the glass. And I understood with horrible clarity that the hitchhiker had been human, or at least human enough. But whatever these things were, they were something else entirely. Something that used humans like him to deliver prey. Something that waited in fog for helpful strangers to stop in pullouts on empty mountain roads. I never saw what happened next. My memory cuts off right there, at that moment of understanding, with those faces at my windows and those two long fingers starting to try the door handles. The next thing I remember is waking up in my car on the side of Highway 20, 8 miles past Washington Pass, with weak morning sunlight filtering through dissipating fog. My phone was in the cup holder, not the back seat. My doors were unlocked. My tank was half empty when it should have been nearly full. And on my passenger seat, neatly folded, was the baseball cap the hitchhiker had been wearing. I drove straight to my parents' house and told them I'd decided to leave early, had driven through the night. I didn't tell them about the hitchhiker or the vehicles or the faces. What would I say? I don't even know what happened in those missing hours. I just know that sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself reaching for my passenger door lock, making sure it's engaged. And I'll never, ever pick up a hitchhiker again. No matter how normal they look, no matter how much they smile, because help isn't always help. Sometimes it's just the hook. I left Portland at 2:47 p.m. I know because I'm obsessive about documenting my mileage. When I pulled into my Seattle driveway, my dashboard clock read 9:23 p.m. The drive takes 3.5 hours. I have no memory of the missing 3. I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep, which means I live out of my car and my life runs on schedules and documentation. I make the Portland to Seattle drive every Tuesday, have been making it for 4 years now, and I know exactly how long it takes. 3 hours and 28 minutes door to door if traffic is good, up to 4.5 if it's bad. I track everything: mileage, gas consumption, timestamps for tax purposes, and expense reports. My entire career depends on being detail-oriented and reliable. So when I say I lost 3 hours, I don't mean I lost track of time. I mean 3 hours of my life simply vanished, and I have no idea what happened during them. It was a Tuesday in late November, overcast and cold, but not particularly unusual weather for the Pacific Northwest. I'd finished my last sales call in Portland at 2:30, noted it in my phone, grabbed a coffee from the Starbucks on Morrison Street, and headed for I-5 North at exactly 2:47 p.m. I remember merging onto the interstate. I remember thinking I'd make good time because traffic was light. I remember turning on a podcast, something about true crime that I'd been halfway through. And then nothing. The next thing I remember is pulling into my driveway in Seattle. My hands on the wheel, the engine running, completely disoriented because it was dark and my dashboard clock said 9:23, and I had absolutely no recollection of the drive. At first, I thought I'd just zoned out, Highway hypnosis. It happens to everyone who drives long distances regularly. You get so familiar with the route that your brain goes on autopilot and you can't remember specific details of the drive. But this wasn't like that. This wasn't forgetting whether I'd passed the Tacoma Dome or which rest stop I'd used. This was a complete blank, like someone had taken an eraser to 3 hours of my memory. I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes trying to reconstruct the drive, trying to pull up any detail, any memory, anything. Nothing came. Just the coffee in Portland, and then suddenly my driveway in Seattle. I went inside, made myself dinner, tried to convince myself it was just fatigue. I'd been working long hours. Maybe I was more tired than I'd realized. But something felt wrong. Not just the missing time, but physically wrong. My throat was sore, like I'd been breathing cold air or maybe smoke. My legs ached, not from sitting but from activity, like I'd been walking or running. And when I took off my jacket, I smelled it. Wood smoke. Not cigarette smoke, but the smell of a campfire or fireplace, strong and unmistakable in the fabric. I hadn't been near a fire. I'd been in my car on the interstate. But the smell was there, and it was fresh. I checked my other clothes, my blouse, my slacks, and they all smelled the same. Wood smoke soaked into the fabric like I'd been standing next to a bonfire for hours. I threw everything in the wash and took a shower, and while the water ran hot over me, I tried again to remember anything about the drive. Still nothing. Just a blank space where 3 hours should be. The next morning, I went out to my car to head to my first appointment. That's when I saw the mud. It was caked under the brake pedal and around the floor mat on the driver's side. Thick, dark mud mixed with pine needles and what looked like moss. Not road dirt, not the kind of grime that accumulates from normal driving. This was forest floor mud, the kind you only get from walking through woods. I stood there staring at it for a long moment, my coffee getting cold in my hand, trying to make sense of it. When had I been in a forest? Why couldn't I remember? I called my office and told them I was taking a sick day, then drove to a car wash and had them detail the interior. While I waited, I checked my phone's location history. Google tracks everywhere you go if you have the app enabled, and I always have it enabled for mileage tracking. I pulled up Tuesday's timeline and felt my stomach drop. According to my phone, I'd stayed on I-5 the entire time. Portland to Seattle, straight shot, no detours. But the timeline showed me stopping for 47 minutes at a location between Olympia and Tacoma. Just a pin on the map with coordinates, no address, nothing to indicate what was there. I zoomed in on the satellite view. Trees. Dense forest on both sides of the interstate. No rest stop, no gas station. Nothing that would explain why I'd stopped or how I'd gotten mud from a forest floor into my car. I did something then that probably wasn't smart, but I couldn't help myself. I drove back down to that location. It was about an hour south of Seattle, and I found the exact spot where my phone said I'd stopped by matching the coordinates. It was just a stretch of I-5 with forest on both sides, nothing unusual about it. No pullouts, no exits for miles in either direction. But when I pulled onto the shoulder and got out, I felt it. That same wrongness I'd felt the night before. The air here was colder than it should be, and there was a smell, faint but present. Wood smoke. I walked along the shoulder, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. 50 feet ahead, I found a gap in the trees. Not exactly a trail, but a break in the underbrush wide enough to walk through. I stood at the edge of it, staring into the shadows between the trees, and every instinct told me not to go in there. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened to those 3 hours. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects. Just the distant sound of traffic from the interstate fading behind me as I walked deeper into the trees. About 100 yards in, I found it. A clearing with a fire pit. The ashes were recent, maybe a day old, still holding warmth when I crouched down and held my hand over them. Surrounding the fire pit were marks in the dirt, strange symbols or patterns that looked like they'd been drawn deliberately. And beyond them, I saw footprints. Dozens of them, all different sizes, like a group of people had been standing in a circle around the fire. One set of footprints matched my shoes. I checked the tread pattern against my sole. Identical. I had been here. I had stood in this clearing, in this circle with other people, around this fire, and I had no memory of it. None. The realization made my knees weak, and I had to sit down on a fallen log to keep from collapsing. What had I done here? Who had I been with, and why? Why couldn't I remember? I took photos of everything with my phone, the clearing, the fire pit, the symbols, the footprints. Then I got out of there as fast as I could, practically running back to my car. When I reached the interstate, I sat in my driver's seat with the doors locked and scrolled through the photos, trying to make sense of them. The symbols meant nothing to me. The footprints could have been anyone, but they included mine, and that was undeniable. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding answers. I went through my bank statements to see if I'd made any purchases during those missing hours. Nothing. I checked my call log, my text messages, my emails, all normal. Nothing sent or received during that time. I even went to a doctor and asked about medical conditions that could cause memory loss. She ordered tests for everything from seizures to early onset dementia. Everything came back normal. There was no medical reason for me to lose 3 hours of memory. But the evidence kept mounting that something had happened. I found scratches on my hands that I didn't remember getting, thin lines like I'd been pushing through brambles. My watch, which I always wore, was missing. I tore my apartment apart looking for it and finally gave up, accepting it was gone. And worst of all, I started having dreams. Not memories exactly, but fragments. Images of standing in a circle with shadowy figures I couldn't quite see. The smell of wood smoke so strong it would wake me up. A voice, low and rhythmic, chanting words I didn't understand. And always, always, the feeling of fog. Thick fog surrounding everything, making it impossible to see clearly, making it impossible to remember. I went back to that clearing 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time there were fresh ashes in the fire pit. Each time there were new footprints, including ones that matched my shoes. And each time I had no memory of being there. I started to wonder if I was having some kind of psychotic break, if I was sleepwalking or having fugue states. But I lived alone, and how would I drive an hour south in my sleep, walk into the forest, participate in whatever was happening in that clearing, and drive home, all without waking up or having an accident? The 4th time I went back, I found something that made me stop going entirely. Hanging from a low branch near the clearing was my watch. It was covered in mud and the band was broken, but it was definitely mine. I recognized the inscription on the back, a gift from my parents when I'd graduated college. But it wasn't the watch itself that scared me. It was what was engraved on the tree trunk above it. A symbol carved deep into the bark that matched one of the symbols from the fire pit. And below it, carved in smaller letters, return. I left the watch there. I left the clearing, and I haven't been back since. I changed my route to Seattle. Now I take Highway 101 up the coast, even though it adds 2 hours to my drive. I don't care. I won't drive I-5 between Olympia and Tacoma anymore, won't risk passing that stretch of forest again, because I think whatever happened in those missing hours is still happening. I think every Tuesday, at the exact time I originally lost those hours, part of me goes back there. Not physically. I've started having friends verify my location on Tuesday evenings to make sure I'm where I think I am. But some part of me, some version of me, is still in that clearing, still standing in that circle, still participating in something I can't remember and don't understand. The worst part is not knowing. I've learned to live with the missing time, with the gaps in my memory. But not knowing what I did, what I agreed to, what I might have participated in. That's what keeps me awake at night. Because those symbols didn't draw themselves. That fire didn't light itself. And my footprints proved I was there, standing with others around that fire, doing something that required wood smoke and forest mud, and 3 hours of time I can no longer account for. Something that apparently requires me to return, whether I remember doing it or not. And the terrifying truth is that I might keep returning, might keep losing hours, might keep participating in whatever happens in that clearing. And I'll never know. I'll never remember. The fog took more than time. It took my certainty that I'm in control of my own life. 7 black SUVs, perfectly spaced, moving in formation like a military escort. No license plates I could see. No reason for them to be out here. And when I tried to pass, they boxed me in. I deliver medical supplies on the overnight route between Yakima and Aberdeen, crossing Highway 12 through White Pass 5 nights a week. It's lonely work, the kind most people wouldn't want. But I prefer it. No traffic, no small talk, just me and the road and whatever audiobook I'm burning through that week. I've been doing this run for 8 years, Seen plenty of strange things in that time. Elk herds crossing in the moonlight, drunk drivers weaving across lanes, once even a small plane making an emergency landing on a straight stretch near Packwood. You see enough weird stuff on night roads and nothing surprises you anymore. Or so I thought. It was a Thursday in late November, around 1 in the morning, and I was heading west through the pass. Fog had settled in thick around Rimrock Lake, the kind that turns your high beams into useless glare. So I'd switched to fog lights and slowed to about 40. The road was empty like it usually is at that hour. I hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving Yakima. My delivery wasn't due in Aberdeen until 6 a.m., so I had plenty of time. I was relaxed, listening to some thriller novel about corporate espionage, not paying attention to much beyond keeping my van between the lines. That's when I first saw them in my rearview mirror. Headlights, multiple sets, appearing suddenly out of the fog behind me. 7 vehicles, all the same model from what I could tell, all black, all maintaining perfect distance from each other. They looked like Chevy Suburbans or maybe Ford Expeditions, the kind of large SUVs that government agencies use or wealthy people buy for intimidation factor. They were moving faster than me, closing the distance steadily, and something about the way they moved made my hands tighten on the wheel. Too precise, too coordinated, like they were connected by invisible wires, all responding to the same commands at the same instant. They caught up to me near the summit, and instead of passing, the lead vehicle slowed to match my speed exactly, 40 miles per hour. The other 6 fell into formation behind it, maintaining those perfect intervals. I could see them clearly in my mirrors now. Identical black SUVs with tinted windows so dark I couldn't see the drivers. No front license plates. And when I checked my side mirror to see the rear of the ones beside me, no back plates either. Just blank black metal where identification should be. I'm not a paranoid person by nature. 8 years of night driving teaches you that most weird things have boring explanations. But something about this felt wrong. I sped up to 50, testing. They matched my speed instantly. Not gradually like normal drivers would, but immediately, like they'd anticipated my move. The formation never wavered. Perfect spacing, perfect synchronization. I slowed back down to 35. They slowed with me, still in formation. It was like being in a moving cage. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of official convoy. Federal agents or military personnel moving equipment. But official convoys don't run without plates. They don't use completely blacked out windows. And they sure as hell don't box in random delivery drivers on empty mountain highways. I grabbed my CB radio and tried calling out, asking if anyone was monitoring, if anyone could explain what I was looking at. Nothing but static came back, and underneath the static, something else. A low rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, that made my skin crawl. I decided to try passing them. There was a straight stretch coming up before the road started its descent toward Packwood, and even in the fog I could see well enough to attempt it. I signaled left, checked my mirror, and accelerated into the passing lane. The moment I did, the formation changed. The 3 SUVs on my left moved in closer, closing the gap until they were inches from my van. The ones behind accelerated, coming up fast. And ahead somehow, 2 more appeared out of the fog that I could have sworn weren't there before. They'd somehow gotten in front of me without passing, without me seeing them move. Now they were ahead, slowing down, forcing me to slow down or rear-end them. I jerked back into the right lane, my heart hammering, and the formation reformed around me. 7 SUVs, perfect spacing, moving in unison. Except now I was certain there had only been 7 before. But when I counted again, I saw 8, then 9. My eyes had to be playing tricks on me in the fog. But each time I counted, the numbers seemed different. 7, then 9, then 8 again. Like they were shifting positions too fast for me to track. Or like some of them weren't entirely solid, flickering in and out of existence. That's when the real fear set in. Not the intellectual fear where you recognize danger, but the animal fear, the kind that makes your legs weak and your vision tunnel. These things, and I was starting to think of them as things rather than vehicles, weren't following me. They were hurting me, keeping me moving in a specific direction at a specific speed, preventing me from leaving the formation. But hurting me toward what? I tried my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in the past, but my phone also wouldn't turn on properly. The screen flickered with static, and for just a moment, I saw something that looked like text. Maintain speed. Maintain lane. Then the phone went completely dead, wouldn't respond to any buttons. I threw it on the passenger seat and focused on driving, on trying to figure out what to do. The fog was getting thicker, and the SUVs were getting closer. I could see now that their windows weren't just tinted, they were completely black, like the glass had been painted over from the inside. No light came from within them, no indication that anyone was actually driving. They moved with mechanical precision, adjusting to every tiny change in my speed or position instantly, and I realized with growing horror that I hadn't seen a single brake light come on. Not once. They accelerated and decelerated without their brake lights ever illuminating, like they were gliding rather than driving. A sign appeared in my headlights. Packwood, 8 miles. 8 miles until I'd reach the town, reach other people, reach help. I just had to stay calm for 8 more miles. But the SUVs seemed to sense my thoughts, or sense the sign, because the formation tightened. The vehicle to my right moved so close, I could have reached out and touched it. The ones behind closed the gap until they were feet from my rear bumper. And the ones ahead slowed gradually, forcing me to slow, forcing all of us down to 30 miles per hour, then 25, then 20. We were barely moving now, crawling through the fog at 20 miles per hour. And I noticed the trees on either side of the road were wrong. They were too close, leaning in over the pavement, their branches forming a tunnel that shouldn't exist on this section of highway. The fog had taken on a greenish tint, like it was lit from below by something phosphorescent. And through the fog, I started seeing shapes. Not trees, but structures. Buildings that shouldn't be here, abandoned vehicles from decades past. Things that looked almost like people standing motionless in the mist, watching us pass. The sign for Packwood should have appeared by now. 8 miles at 20 miles per hour should have taken less than half an hour. But my dashboard clock showed nearly an hour had passed, and there was no sign of the town. Just more fog, more wrong trees, more impossible structures at the edge of my vision. The SUVs maintained their formation, patient and inexorable, herding me deeper into wherever this road was actually going. I made a decision then that probably saved my life. Instead of continuing to let them control me, I slammed on my brakes. Just stopped completely, right there in the middle of the highway. The formation scattered. Some of the SUVs shot past me, some swerved into the other lane, and for just a moment, the cage broke open. I cranked my wheel hard right and floored it, driving off the road into the forest, my van bouncing over rough terrain, branches scraping metal, my headlights cutting wild arcs through the trees. Behind me, I saw the SUVs trying to follow, but they moved wrong off-road. Too stiff, too awkward, like they weren't designed for anything except pavement. I kept driving, praying I wouldn't hit a tree or drop into a ravine, just focused on getting away from them, getting away from that formation and whatever destination they'd been herding me toward. My van crashed through undergrowth, bottomed out on rocks, and then suddenly I was back on pavement. Actual pavement, with lane markers and a normal yellow dividing line. I was on Highway 12, but everything looked normal now. The fog was lighter, the trees were the right distance from the road, and when I checked my mirror, there was nothing behind me. No SUVs, no formation, just empty highway and normal fog. My radio crackled back to life with regular CB chatter. My phone rebooted itself in the passenger seat. And ahead, maybe a mile distant, I saw the lights of Packwood. I pulled into the first gas station I found and sat in the parking lot with my engine running for 20 minutes, just shaking. The van was trashed, scratches down both sides, a cracked headlight, mud and pine needles packed into every crevice. But I was alive. I was out. When I finally went inside to buy coffee, the attendant asked if I was okay, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him I'd swerved to avoid a deer and gone off-road. He seemed to accept that. I finished my delivery that morning, but I quit the job the following week. Told my supervisor I was moving out of state, which was a lie. I just couldn't drive that route anymore. Couldn't risk ending up in that formation again, couldn't risk finding out where they'd been hurting me. Because I think if I'd stayed in that cage for a few more miles, I would have reached whatever destination they had planned. And I don't think I would have come back from it. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be driving and I'll see a black SUV in my rearview mirror. Just one, always just one, with tinted windows and no plates visible. It never gets close, never tries to box me in. It just follows for a mile or two, then disappears at the next exit or turn. And I wonder if it's checking on me, making sure I'm still here, still in the normal world. Or if it's waiting for me to slip up, to drive the wrong road at the wrong time. So the formation can find me again and finish herding me to wherever I was supposed to go. I don't know which possibility scares me more. The voice crackled through on a frequency I'd never heard traffic on before. Male, middle-aged, utterly calm. Subject vehicle, dark blue Honda Civic, now passing Vista Point. Dense fog. Speed approximately 35 miles per hour. Beginning countdown, 100. I'm a ham radio enthusiast, have been since I was 16, and I know every frequency worth monitoring in the Pacific Northwest. I was driving to a radio operator's meetup in Hood River, my mobile rig mounted under my dashboard, scanning through channels out of habit more than expectation. The historic Columbia River Highway isn't exactly a hotbed of radio activity. Mostly truckers on CB, occasional park rangers, sometimes hikers with walkie-talkies. So when that voice came through on 402.7 MHz, a frequency that should have been empty, I almost didn't register what it was saying at first. Just another transmission, background noise to my drive. Then my brain caught up to my ears and I realized what I'd heard. Dark blue Honda Civic. That was my car. Vista Point. I just passed that overlook maybe 30 seconds ago. The fog had rolled in thick about 10 miles back, turning the famous scenic highway into a claustrophobic tunnel of white. And that voice had described my exact situation, my exact location, my exact speed. I grabbed the mic and keyed it, my heart starting to pound. This is KF7RLM. Who is this? Identify yourself. Nothing but static. I waited, counting seconds, then tried again. This is KF7RLM on 462.7. Please identify. You just described my vehicle. What's going on? Still nothing. I was about to chalk it up to some weird coincidence. Maybe someone else in a blue Civic nearby that I couldn't see in the fog, when the voice came back, still perfectly calm, still utterly emotionless. Subject vehicle maintaining speed. Now approaching La Tourelle Falls turnoff. 94. I looked at my odometer, at the road ahead appearing in slow increments through the fog. La Tourelle Falls was maybe half a mile ahead. I could see the sign emerging from the white. And that number, 94. He'd said 100 before, now 94. He was counting down. Counting down to what? I pressed the accelerator, speeding up to 50, my hands slick on the wheel. I needed to get to Hood River, needed to get around other people, needed to understand what was happening. The voice returned within seconds. Subject vehicle accelerating. Speed now 50 miles per hour. Deviation noted. 89. He'd skipped numbers. 5 numbers for the 30 seconds or so since his last transmission. 1 number for every 6 seconds. I did the math quickly. At that rate, he'd reach 0 in about 9 minutes. 9 minutes until what? I grabbed my phone from the cup holder, tried to dial 911, but there was no signal. The fog seemed to be blocking everything except that one frequency, that one voice describing my every move. I kept driving, faster now, watching the road materialize in front of me, just barely in time to take the curves. The historic Columbia River Highway is beautiful in clear weather. Waterfalls, vista points, dramatic cliffs overlooking the gorge. In dense fog, it's a nightmare of blind curves and sheer drops. But I didn't care about safety anymore. I cared about that countdown. About the clinical precision in that voice, about the fact that someone was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see them. Subject vehicle now passing Bridal Veil Falls State Park. Speed 55 miles per hour. Fog density increasing, 77. The voice never wavered, never showed emotion, just stated facts like a scientist recording observations. I screamed into my radio, demanding answers, threatening to call the police, pleading for whoever it was to stop, to explain. The only response was that voice, relentless and calm. Subject displaying signs of distress. Vocal output elevated. Heart rate estimated at 110 beats per minute. 68. How could he know my heart rate? Was he guessing? But no, it felt right. My heart was hammering, probably exactly 110 beats per minute, which meant he wasn't just watching me from a distance. He was close. Close enough to see me clearly, or maybe he had equipment. Infrared, thermal imaging, something that could read my vital signs through the fog. I checked my mirrors frantically, but saw nothing except white fog and my own taillights reflecting back at me. Subject checking mirrors. Defensive behaviors emerging. Approaching Joaquina Falls. 59. Less than a minute had passed. He was counting faster now, or maybe I was burning through time faster than I realized. Panic does that, distorts your sense of duration. I tried changing frequencies on my radio, scanning through every channel, looking for any other sign of life, anyone else who might hear me. Every frequency was dead except 462.7, where that voice waited patiently to deliver its next observation. I made a split-second decision and jerked my wheel right, taking the turnoff for Multnomah Falls at the last possible second. If someone was following me, tracking me, I'd lose them in the parking area, find park rangers or tourists, find help. The voice responded immediately. Subject vehicle departing primary route. taking Multnomah Falls Access Road. Attempting evasion. 46. The parking lot was empty. Completely, impossibly empty. Multnomah Falls is one of the most visited sites in Oregon. There should be people, cars, rangers, someone. Instead, there was nothing but fog and empty parking spaces, and that horrible voice continuing its countdown. Subject vehicle stopped. Subject displaying extreme distress. Heart rate now 130 beats per minute. Respiratory rate elevated, 38. I locked my doors and sat there, breathing hard, trying to think. Whoever was doing this had cleared the area somehow, or the fog had, or I'd driven into something that wasn't quite the real world anymore. The voice knew everything: my speed, my heart rate, my location, my actions. It was like being dissected while still alive. Every part of me observed and catalogued and reported in that clinical monotone. Subject attempting to calm respiratory function. Unsuccessful. Subject searching vehicle interior for potential weapons or defensive tools. 29. I froze, my hand halfway to the tire iron I kept under the passenger seat. He could see inside my car. Through the fog, through my windows, he could see exactly what I was doing. I looked up through my windshield and saw only white fog pressing against the glass. But somewhere in that fog, eyes were watching, instruments were measuring, and that voice was narrating my terror. I started the car and floored it, driving back toward the highway, tires squealing on the wet pavement. I didn't care about the countdown anymore, didn't care about understanding. I just needed to escape, to break whatever observation grid I'd driven into, to get back to the real world where fog was just fog and voices on radios belonged to real people. Subject fleeing. Speed 60 miles per hour. Returning to primary route, 18. 18. Less than 2 minutes until 0. Until whatever happened at 0. The fog was impossibly thick now, so dense I could barely see my own hood. I was driving blind, steering by instinct and memory, praying I'd hit the straightaway soon, praying I wouldn't miss a curve and plunge over the cliff into the gorge. The voice continued. Subject entering critical phase. Visibility near 0. Speed dangerous for conditions. 12. I wanted to stop, wanted to pull over and just wait it out. But stopping felt like giving up, like accepting whatever fate that countdown represented. So I kept driving, knuckles white on the wheel, leaning forward until my face was inches from the windshield, searching desperately for the road. 8. The voice was still calm, still clinical, but I could swear I heard something underneath it now. Anticipation, maybe, or satisfaction. 7. My radio suddenly filled with static, loud and overwhelming, drowning out that horrible voice. I fumbled for the volume control, but it wouldn't respond. The static got louder, building to a roar that hurt my ears. And underneath it I could hear, or thought I could hear, other voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all counting down in unison. 3. Every voice slightly different, but all perfectly synchronized, all marking the seconds until 0. I slammed on my brakes, closing my eyes, unable to drive anymore, unable to do anything but wait for whatever was coming. The voices reached 1, held it for an impossibly long moment, and then in perfect unison, 0. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. No static, no voices, no engine noise, even though my car was still running. I opened my eyes slowly and saw that the fog had vanished. Just gone. Like someone had flipped a switch. I was sitting in the middle of the historic Columbia River Highway in brilliant sunshine, surrounded by normal tourist traffic, People in the cars around me staring at me like I was crazy for sitting, stopped in the middle of the road. My radio was off. Not just silent, physically off, the power light dark, even though I never touched the switch. I turned it back on and scanned through every frequency. Normal traffic, normal chatter, no sign of that voice or that frequency. I drove in numb shock to the meetup in Hood River, walking in 2 hours late. My fellow radio enthusiasts asked where I'd been, if I'd gotten lost. I told them yes, I'd gotten lost in the fog. That was 3 years ago. I still do ham radio, still monitor frequencies, still attend meetups. But I won't drive the historic Columbia River Highway anymore. And I won't drive in fog if I can help it. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm scanning through dead frequencies, I'll hear something. Just for a second, just a fragment. That same calm voice, saying numbers, always counting down. And I wonder if it's still watching me, still measuring me, still waiting for another opportunity to complete whatever process I interrupted by surviving. I wonder if next time, when the countdown reaches 0, I'll still be here when the fog clears, or if I'll have gone wherever that voice wanted to take me, wherever all those other voices were calling from when they counted down together. I don't know, and I don't ever want to find out. The GPS said 15 minutes. The detour would add 15 minutes, then I'd be back on Highway 22. That was 4 hours ago. The roads keep getting worse. And I just passed a gas station with pumps from the 1950s. And they looked abandoned yesterday, not 70 years ago. I sell real estate in the Salem area, mostly rural properties, which means I spend a lot of time driving back roads to reach listings that barely show up on maps. I'm good with directions usually. But I'll admit I've become completely dependent on GPS over the years. Why memorize routes when your phone can guide you perfectly every time? That dependency is what got me into the situation, and I'm not sure it's going to get me out. I was heading to a property showing east of Salem up in the Cascade foothills. A potential buyer wanted to see a 100-acre parcel with timber value, and I'd scheduled it for 2 in the afternoon. I left my office at noon, plenty of time for the hour drive, and everything was fine until I hit Highway 22 and saw the digital road sign. Road closed ahead. Detour. There'd been rock slides in the area recently, so I wasn't surprised. My GPS immediately recalculated, showing a detour that added 15 minutes. No problem. I'd still make the appointment with time to spare. The detour started normally enough, a right turn onto a county road I'd never used before. 2 lanes of decent pavement cutting through forest. My GPS showed a blue line snaking through green terrain, with clear instructions to follow this road for 8 miles, then turn left, then right, then back onto Highway 22. Simple. I turned up my podcast and settled in for the extra drive time. But at the 8-mile mark, where I should have turned left, there was no intersection, just forest on both sides and the road continuing straight ahead. I slowed down, confused, checking my GPS. The blue dot showing my location was right on top of where the turn should be, but there was nothing there. The GPS insisted I should turn left, its voice calmly repeating, "Turn left," even though turning left would mean driving into trees. I continued straight, figuring the map data was slightly off, figuring the turn must be just ahead. A mile later, the pavement ended. Not gradually, not with warning signs, just ended, turning into gravel like someone had drawn a line and decided pavement wasn't needed anymore. My GPS still showed me on a paved county road. Still insisted the turn was behind me, still tried to recalculate in a loop that kept failing. I stopped the car and checked my phone signal. 1 bar, barely enough for anything. I tried pulling up Google Maps as a backup, but it wouldn't load, just spinning endlessly while my location dot drifted aimlessly across the screen. I should have turned around right then. Should have backtracked to Highway 22, called the buyer, rescheduled. But I could see on my GPS that if I just kept going straight, I'd eventually intersect with another road that would take me east, back toward where I needed to be. It looked like maybe 3 miles on the map. 3 miles of gravel wouldn't kill me, and I'd still make my appointment. So I kept driving. The gravel road was rough but passable, winding through increasingly dense forest. I didn't see any houses, any driveways, any signs of human presence at all. Just trees and more trees, Douglas firs and cedars so thick they blocked most of the sunlight, making it feel like dusk even though it was barely past noon. My GPS still showed roads ahead, intersections coming up, civilization just around the next bend. But the roads kept not appearing. Every intersection on the map turned out to be just more forest, the gravel road continuing endlessly forward. After 30 minutes of driving on gravel, the road got worse. The gravel turned to dirt, rutted and muddy from recent rain. My sedan wasn't made for this kind of road, and I felt the undercarriage scraping on high spots, heard rocks pinging against the frame. But I was committed now. Going back meant retracing miles of bad road, and the GPS insisted I was close to a proper intersection. Close to getting back on track, just a little farther. That's when I saw the first house. It appeared suddenly through the trees, an old farmhouse with weathered gray siding and a collapsed porch. Abandoned, obviously, but not recently. This place had been empty for decades, windows broken, roof sagging, blackberry vines covering everything. What struck me was how it looked abandoned. Not like a house that had been left for a long time, but like a house that had been abandoned in a hurry and then forgotten by time itself. There was a car in the driveway, a sedan from the 70s, tires rotted away, sitting on its rims. No license plates, no identification, just rust and decay. I drove past it slowly, my hands tight on the wheel. And that's when I started seeing more structures. More old houses, a collapsed barn. What looked like a schoolhouse with no windows and no door. All of them decades old, all of them abandoned in ways that made no sense. These weren't historical buildings preserved for tourism. These were places that had been lived in and then left behind. Buildings that shouldn't exist this deep in forest with no proper road access. Who had lived here? How had they gotten here? And why did none of this show up on my GPS, which still insisted I was driving on a maintained county road? The dirt road narrowed further, becoming barely more than a path, tree branches scraping both sides of my car. I had to stop. My sedan couldn't handle this, and I was going to get stuck if I went any farther. I put the car in park and sat there, trying to figure out what to do. My GPS was useless, showing me in completely the wrong location. My phone had no signal at all now, and I had no idea how far back it was to actual civilization, to roads that really existed instead of just showing up on digital maps. I decided to walk ahead, just to see if the path opened up, if there was any indication of where it led. I grabbed my phone and my keys and started walking, leaving my car running in case I needed to make a quick exit. The path continued for maybe a quarter mile, getting narrower and more overgrown, until it opened into a clearing. And in that clearing was a town. Not a living town, a dead one. Maybe 20 buildings arranged along what had once been a main street, storefronts with faded signs, a post office, what might have been a hotel. All of it abandoned, all of it decades old, all of it impossible. There are no ghost towns in the Oregon Cascades this close to Salem. I would know. I sell real estate here. I know the history. I know the geography. This place shouldn't exist. I walked down the main street in a daze, reading the signs. A general store advertising prices from the 1950s. A gas station with pumps that predated my parents. A movie theater with a marquee still advertising films I'd never heard of. Everything was weathered and decayed, but somehow preserved, like time had stopped here rather than moved forward. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, no indication anyone had been here in decades. Just this impossible town sitting in the middle of forest, accessible only by a path that barely qualified as a road, appearing on no maps. I took photos with my phone, documentation of something I didn't understand. Then I heard it. An engine. Distant, but definitely an engine. Coming from somewhere beyond the town. I walked toward the sound, past the last buildings, and found another road on the far side. A better road, gravel but well-maintained, with fresh tire tracks. And driving away down that road, maybe a quarter-mile distant, was a car. A modern car. Someone else was here. I ran back to my car, my heart pounding. If there was someone else, they could tell me where I was, how to get out. I managed to turn my sedan around in the narrow path, scraping paint and losing a side mirror in the process, and drove back through the ghost town to the better road. I turned in the direction the car had gone and accelerated, desperate to catch up. But the road just kept going. Miles of gravel through endless forest, no car ahead, no intersections, nothing but trees, and that road unwinding forever. My gas gauge was showing half empty when it should have been nearly full. My dashboard clock said 4:47 p.m. I'd been driving for almost 5 hours since I took that detour, and I'd made it nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. The road started getting worse again, the gravel thinning, dirt showing through. No, I thought. No, not again. But it kept degrading, turning back into dirt, into ruts, into that barely passable path. I was going in circles somehow, or the roads were looping back on themselves, or I'd driven into something that didn't follow normal geography. The GPS had long since given up, just showing a blue dot on a gray screen with no context, no roads, no landmarks. Just that dot, drifting. I finally stopped when the path became impassable, blocked by a fallen tree. I got out and walked around it. And on the other side was another ghost town. Different buildings, different layout, but the same impossible abandonment, the same sense of places that existed outside of time. And beyond it, I could see another path leading away. And I knew if I followed it, I'd just find more forest, more degrading roads, more forgotten places. That's when I understood. The detour hadn't just taken me off Highway 22. It had taken me off the normal map entirely, into some network of forgotten roads and abandoned places that existed in the gaps between where people actually go. My GPS had tried to route me through spaces that shouldn't be routed through. And I'd followed blindly, trusting technology more than sense, driving deeper and deeper into geographic impossibility. I walked back to my car and made a decision. I was going back the way I came, not forward. Following these paths only led deeper into nowhere. I needed to retrace every turn, every mile, back to that original detour, back to Highway 22. It took 3 hours of careful driving, memorizing landmarks, backtracking when paths split in ways I didn't remember. But eventually, finally, I found pavement again. Real pavement. And then the county road. And then Highway 22. When I pulled back onto the highway, it was after 8 p.m., I'd been in that network of impossible roads for over 8 hours. My car was filthy, scratched, and my phone suddenly had signal again, showing dozens of missed calls from my client, my office, everyone wondering where I'd disappeared to. I called and apologized, said I'd gotten lost, which was the truth. Just not the whole truth. I don't use GPS anymore for rural properties. I study paper maps. I memorize routes. I never trust digital directions through unfamiliar territory. Because I learned that maps can show roads that go places you're not meant to find, places that exist in the forgotten spaces between here and there, places where you can drive forever and never reach anywhere at all. And once you turn down those roads, following those helpful blue lines into the white spaces on the map, there's no guarantee you'll find your way back. I was lucky. But I still have those photos on my phone, those ghost towns that don't appear on any map. And sometimes I wonder how many other people followed detours that went too deep, trusted their GPS into places they couldn't return from. I wonder if they're still out there, still driving those degrading roads, still trying to find the intersection that will take them home. I recognized the car first, silver Subaru, passenger side caved in. Then I recognized the woman in the driver's seat, blood running from her temple in an identical pattern. I'd bandaged that same wound 6 hours ago. I'd watched the ambulance take her away. I'm a paramedic, 11 years on the job, and I've seen pretty much everything the human body can survive, and everything it can't. You develop a kind of clinical detachment after a while. Not because you stop caring, but because caring too much will destroy you. You learn to focus on the work, on the protocols, on doing your job efficiently so people have the best chance of making it. That detachment is what kept me functional during my double shift that day, responding to 6 calls including a bad MVA on Highway 26 around 3 in the afternoon. Motor vehicle accident, 2 victims, 1 critical. I'd done my job, stabilized them, handed them off to the ER, and clocked out at 9 p.m. exhausted but satisfied. Both victims would live. I'd helped make that happen. I was driving home on the same stretch of Highway 26, about 20 miles west of Portland in rural Washington County. The fog had rolled in thick while I'd been at the hospital, turning the road into a tunnel of white. I was tired, looking forward to a shower and 12 hours of sleep, not really paying attention to anything except keeping my car between the lines. That's probably why I almost didn't stop when I saw the car in the ditch. Almost. But 11 years of training doesn't let you drive past an accident, no matter how tired you are. I pulled over, grabbed my personal first aid kit from the trunk, I never drive without one, and ran toward the vehicle. It was a silver Subaru Outback, passenger side crumpled where it had hit something, probably a tree based on the damage pattern. The driver was slumped over the wheel, and I could see blood on her face. My training kicked in immediately, assessing the scene as I approached. Single vehicle, driver possibly unconscious, no other victims visible, car stable, no fire risk, safe to approach. I pulled open the driver's door, and that's when I saw her face clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, blonde hair, blood running from a laceration on her right temple in a diagonal line across her forehead. And I knew her. I'd treated her 6 hours ago. Same woman, same injury, same diagonal laceration, same silver Subaru Outback with the same damage pattern on the passenger side. My hands froze halfway to her neck where I'd been reaching to check her pulse. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" My voice came out automatic, professional, while my brain tried to catch up to what I was seeing. She moaned slightly, her eyes fluttering. The same moan, the same flutter. I'd seen this exact response earlier today. I checked her pulse, rapid and thready, exactly like before. I examined the head wound, actively bleeding, exactly like before. Even the way she was slumped over the wheel, her left arm trapped between her body and the door, was identical. I pulled out my phone and called 911, giving them the location and patient status while I started treating her. Direct pressure on the head wound with gauze from my kit. Checking her pupils. Unequal, possible concussion or worse. Assessing for other injuries. Complained of chest pain when I asked. Likely rib injuries from the steering wheel. Everything matched. Everything was exactly the same as the accident I'd responded to at 3:17 p.m., except now it was 9:43 p.m., and I was off duty. And the woman I'd already saved was somehow injured again in the same way, in the same location. "Stay with me," I told her, holding pressure on her wound. "Help is coming. You're going to be fine." The same words I'd said earlier. She looked at me with unfocused eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And I felt my stomach drop because her voice was exactly the same. The gratitude and fear mixed in the same proportions. This wasn't a similar accident. This was the same accident, happening again. And I was somehow here for both. I heard sirens in the distance and felt a wave of relief. Other responders would see this too, would confirm I wasn't having some kind of breakdown. The ambulance pulled up, and 2 paramedics got out. I didn't recognize them, not my usual crew, which made sense since I'd just gotten off shift, and this was probably the night crew from a different station. They approached with their equipment, professional and efficient, and I briefed them quickly on the patient's status. Head lack, approximately 4 centimeters, actively bleeding. Pupils unequal. Possible rib fractures. Patient is conscious but altered. She needs transport immediately. They nodded and took over, and I stepped back to let them work. I should have left then, should have let them handle it. But I couldn't. I watched them stabilize her, watched them load her onto the backboard, watched them lift her into the ambulance. Every movement, every procedure, every step was exactly what I had done, what my crew had done, 6 hours earlier. One of the paramedics, a young guy maybe late 20s, glanced at me as they were loading her in. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen this accident before," I said. And the words sounded insane, even as I said them. "Earlier today, same patient, same injuries, same location. I responded to this at 3:17 this afternoon." He gave me that look I recognized from my own experience. The look you give people who are in shock, who aren't making sense, who need to be humored carefully. You must be exhausted. Double shift, right? Sometimes they all start to blend together. Get some rest. Then they were gone, lights and sirens fading into the fog, leaving me alone on the side of Highway 26 next to a silver Subaru Outback that shouldn't exist. I called my supervisor. I don't know why. Maybe for reassurance, maybe just to have someone tell me I wasn't crazy. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding tired. I explained what had happened, tried to keep my voice steady and professional. There was a long pause after I finished. "You're talking about the MVA on Highway 26 this afternoon?" she asked carefully. "Yes. Same patient. I just responded to the same accident again." Another pause. "Both victims from that accident are at Emmanuel Hospital right now. I checked on them before I left tonight. The driver had surgery for internal bleeding, but she's stable. The passenger was treated and released. They're both fine." "Then who did I just treat?" My voice was too loud, too sharp. "Because I'm standing next to her car right now, and she had the same injuries, the same—" "Go home," my supervisor said, her voice gentle but firm. "You worked 16 hours today. You're exhausted. Sometimes our brains play tricks on us when we're that tired, especially after a difficult shift. Go home, get some sleep, and we'll talk tomorrow." She hung up. I stood there in the fog, holding my phone, looking at the Subaru. It was real. The blood on my gloves was real. The woman I'd just treated was real. But according to my supervisor, she was also currently recovering in a hospital bed 20 miles away. Both things couldn't be true. But I'd seen both. I'd treated both. I got in my car and drove away. But I couldn't go home. I drove to Emmanuel Hospital instead. Went to the ER and asked about the MVA patients from that afternoon. The nurse checked her computer and confirmed. Both patients admitted. Both stable. Driver, currently in post-op recovery. I asked if I could see her, claimed I'd been on the responding crew and wanted to check on her condition. The nurse seemed skeptical, but eventually let me go up. The woman in the recovery room was the same woman. Same face, same blonde hair, now clean and bandaged. She was sleeping, hooked up to monitors showing stable vitals, an IV in her arm. She'd just had surgery for a lacerated spleen and broken ribs. She was here. She was real. She was recovering. But I'd also just left her at an accident scene on Highway 26. Had loaded her into an ambulance. Had watched her driven away. I left the hospital and drove back to Highway 26, back to the spot where I'd stopped. The Subaru was gone. No skid marks on the road. No broken glass. No evidence an accident had occurred there at all. I searched the shoulder with my flashlight, looking for anything. Tire tracks, disturbed gravel, a piece of trim that had broken off. Nothing. Just road and fog and the kind of silence that makes you question everything you think you know about reality. I called the dispatch center and asked if they had any record of an MVA on Highway 26 around 9:43 p.m. The dispatcher checked and said no. The only accident on that stretch of road today was at 3:17 p.m. No other calls. No other response. I asked if they had a recording of my 911 call from 40 minutes ago. She checked again and said there was no record of me calling tonight at all. I went home eventually, though I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table reviewing what I knew for certain. I'd responded to an MVA at 3:17 p.m. I'd treated a woman with specific injuries in a specific car. I'd handed her off to transport, and she'd been taken to Emmanuel Hospital where she underwent surgery. That was documented, verified, real. Then, 6 hours later, I'd encountered the exact same accident, exact same patient, exact same injuries, at the same location. I'd treated her again, called for transport again, watched her taken away again. That was real too. I had blood on my gloves to prove it. Except when I looked at my gloves, they were clean. No blood. Nothing. The psychological term is false memory. But I know what those feel like. I've had them after particularly traumatic calls. Moments where your brain tries to protect you by changing details or creating gaps. This wasn't that. This was too detailed, too specific, too consistent. I could remember every second of that second accident. Could recall the pattern of blood on her face, the sound of her moaning, the way the fog moved around the ambulance lights. It was as real as any call I'd ever responded to. I went back to work the next day because I didn't know what else to do. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if I was okay, if I needed to talk to someone about stress management. I said I was fine, that I'd just been tired and confused. She seemed satisfied with that answer. I didn't tell her that I'd driven past that spot on Highway 26 twice that morning, and both times I'd seen something in the fog that might have been a silver Subaru. might have been nothing, flickering in and out of existence at the edge of my vision. The woman from the accident recovered fully. I checked on her progress through the hospital system. Discharged after 3 days, follow-up appointments scheduled, prognosis good. She was real and alive and healing. But somewhere, in some fog-bound version of Highway 26, I think she's still trapped in that accident, still bleeding from that temple wound, still waiting for someone to stop and help her. And I think I responded to that version, treated that echo, called for an ambulance that took her nowhere because she was already somewhere else recovering. I don't drive Highway 26 anymore if I can avoid it, and I never drive it when fog is forecast. Because I'm afraid I'll see it again, that same silver Subaru, that same woman, that same accident playing out like a recording stuck on loop. And I'm afraid that next time, I won't be able to help her. Because how do you save someone who's trapped in a moment that already happened? How do you treat injuries that have already been treated? Transport a patient who's already been transported? I'm a paramedic. My job is to help people in the worst moments of their lives. But that night taught me there are moments that don't end, that just keep happening over and over in the fog. And no amount of training prepares you for realizing you're trying to save someone who's trapped in time itself. She's fine now, recovered, living her life. But part of her is still there, will always be there, bleeding and scared and waiting for help that can't actually help because the moment has already passed and somehow hasn't passed at all. And if you drive that road in thick fog, you might see her too. You might stop to help. And then you'll understand why I can't anymore. Musicians develop good rhythm sense. You feel patterns instinctively. So when something in the fog matched my speed exactly for 20 miles, I felt it before I consciously noticed it. Whatever was out there, it was following a rhythm. My rhythm. I play session guitar for a living, which means I spend a lot of nights in small venues across the Pacific Northwest, backing up singers and bands that need a reliable guitarist for their shows. It's good work if you don't mind the late hours and the driving. That night, I'd been playing at a bar in Port Angeles, finished around midnight, and was heading back to Seattle via Highway 101 around the Olympic Peninsula. It's a longer route than going inland, but I prefer it. Something about driving along the coast at night clears my head after hours of loud music and crowd noise. The fog rolled in around Forks, which didn't surprise me. The Olympic Peninsula generates fog like it's a full-time job, pulling moisture off the Pacific and draping it across the forest in thick blankets. I slowed down to about 45 and settled in for the careful drive ahead. My headlights barely penetrated 20 feet, and the trees on either side of the road disappeared into white nothing. I'd made this drive dozens of times in fog, so I wasn't nervous, just focused and alert. About 10 miles past Forks, I started to feel it. Not see it, feel it. That rhythm sense I mentioned, the thing that makes me a good session musician, was picking up on something moving parallel to my car. A presence in the fog to my right, in the forest, keeping pace. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, my tired brain creating patterns where none existed. But the feeling persisted, grew stronger, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was out there, matching my speed exactly. I glanced to the right, trying to see through the fog and between the trees. Nothing visible, just white fog and dark tree trunks. But I could feel it. The air pressure seemed different on that side of the car, like something large was displacing atmosphere. I sped up slightly, testing, bringing my speed to 50. The presence kept pace. I could feel it accelerating with me, maintaining exact distance. I slowed back down to 40. It slowed too, perfectly synchronized. My first rational thought was that it was another vehicle on a parallel road, maybe a logging road I couldn't see through the fog. But I knew this stretch of 101. There were no parallel roads here, just dense Olympic National Forest stretching for miles. My second thought was an animal, maybe a deer or elk running alongside the road. But no animal maintains perfect speed with a vehicle for miles. They either run ahead or fall behind. They don't match pace exactly, don't stay perfectly parallel, don't move with the mechanical precision I was feeling. I'm not a fearful person by nature. You can't be, not when you've spent 15 years playing dive bars at 2 in the morning and driving home alone. But fear isn't always about personality. Sometimes it's just intelligence recognizing danger. And my intelligence was starting to scream at me that something was very wrong. Whatever was out there, it was too big and too coordinated to be natural. I could feel the weight of it, the mass, the way it moved through the forest without crashing through undergrowth or snapping branches. It glided, smooth and silent and impossibly large. I tried the radio, looking for company, for human voices to ground me in reality. Nothing but static and the occasional burst of distant conversation too garbled to make out. I tried my phone, no signal, which was normal out here. I was alone with whatever was pacing me, and it showed no signs of leaving. Miles passed. 5, 10, 15. Still there, still matching my speed, still maintaining that perfect distance. I started to sweat despite the cold November air. Then the fog thinned slightly, just for a moment, and I saw it. Not clearly, just a shape. A massive dark form moving between the trees. Too tall. That was my first coherent thought. Too tall to be on the ground. The trees in this section of forest are old growth, Douglas firs and Sitka spruces, some of them 200 feet high. And whatever I was seeing was moving at their height, not at ground level. It was in the canopy, above the tree line, moving through space where nothing that size should be able to move. I slammed on my brakes without thinking, pure panic response. My car skidded slightly on the wet pavement, and I came to a stop in the middle of the highway. The presence stopped too. I could feel it out there in the fog, motionless now, waiting. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my breath coming too fast. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't a vehicle. This was something else entirely. Something that moved through the canopy of ancient trees like they were grass. Something so large it could keep pace with a car while navigating obstacles that would stop any known creature. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Behind me, the road disappeared into fog. Ahead, the same. To my right, that presence waited. Watching? Could it see me? Did it have eyes? I didn't want to know. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to get away from it. I put my car back in gear and accelerated hard, pushing up to 60 despite the fog, despite the dangerous curves I knew were coming. Fear beat caution. Terror beat common sense. It came with me. The moment I accelerated, I felt it moving again, effortlessly matching my new speed. 60 miles per hour through dense forest canopy, somehow navigating between massive tree trunks and heavy branches without making a sound. Without disturbing the fog, without leaving any evidence of its passage except that feeling, that horrible rhythmic presence that moved in perfect synchronization with my car. I felt like prey. Like something small being tracked by something vast, something patient, something that could take me whenever it wanted but was choosing not to. Yet, the road curved inland, away from the coast, and the forest got even denser. I was doing 70 now on roads that shouldn't be driven faster than 45. My tires squealing on wet pavement, my headlights cutting wild arcs through the fog. But I couldn't slow down. Slowing down meant accepting the presence, meant acknowledging that it had me, that there was no escape. As long as I was moving fast, I could pretend I was running. I could pretend I had some control. That's when I heard it. Not with my ears. I couldn't explain it then, and I can't now. I felt it through the car, through my bones, through some sense that humans have mostly forgotten. A sound too low for normal hearing, a vibration that made my sternum ache and my vision blur. It was breathing. The thing in the forest was breathing, and each breath moved air with the force of wind, moved the fog in patterns I could see in my peripheral vision. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Perfectly timed to its movement, perfectly synchronized to my speed. I screamed then, I'm not ashamed to admit it. Screamed in pure terror at the realization that something alive, something that breathed and moved and tracked, was out there in the fog, larger than anything I could comprehend. The scream didn't help. The presence didn't react. It just kept pace, kept breathing, kept moving through the impossible heights of the forest canopy like physics and biology were suggestions it had chosen to ignore. Lake Crescent appeared ahead, the road curving along its shore. I knew this section, relatively straight, relatively open, with the lake on the left and thinner forest on the right. If I was going to see it clearly, it would be here. Part of me wanted to look, needed to understand what was following me. Part of me knew that looking directly at it would break something in my mind, would show me something humans aren't meant to see. I looked. The fog had thinned over the lake, and in that clearer air, I saw its shadow. Not the thing itself. I still thank whatever gods might exist that I didn't see it directly, but its shadow, cast by my own headlights onto the fog. The shadow of something that rose above the tallest trees, something with a shape that my brain couldn't quite process. Too many limbs? Not enough? Proportions that didn't make sense? I only saw it for a second before my conscious mind rejected the image, literally refused to retain it. But that second was enough to understand the scale. I was an ant being followed by something the size of a building. No, bigger. The size of a mountain that could move. I floored the accelerator, pushing my car to 85, 90 speeds that were insane on this road in these conditions. The lake flashed past, the forest closed back in, and then I saw lights ahead. The small town of Port Angeles' outer limits, civilization, safety, witnesses. The presence fell back. I felt it slow, felt it stop, felt it retreat into the forest like it had never been there at all. By the time I reached the first streetlight, it was gone completely, leaving only that rhythmic memory, that feeling of being perfectly matched, perfectly tracked. I didn't stop in Port Angeles. I drove straight through, didn't slow down until I hit the Hood Canal Bridge. Didn't feel safe until I was crossing into Seattle with thousands of other cars around me, surrounded by humanity and light and the comfortable noise of civilization. I pulled into a 24-hour diner and sat in the parking lot for an hour, shaking, trying to process what had happened. I've read since then about the old stories from the Olympic Peninsula, the native legends about things that live in the deep forest, things that predate human settlement. Things so large and so other that seeing them drives people mad. I used to think those were just stories, explanations for the vast darkness of old-growth forest, for the way ancient trees make you feel small and insignificant. I don't think that anymore. I think there are things in those forests that we've forgotten about. Things that move through the canopy in fog. Things that track cars out of curiosity or hunger or reasons we couldn't comprehend if we tried. I still play sessions, still take gigs across the peninsula. But I don't drive Highway 101 at night anymore. I go inland, take the longer route, pay for the extra gas. And if I'm ever driving at night and fog rolls in, and I start to feel that rhythm, that sense of something matching my pace, I immediately pull into the nearest town, the nearest gas station, the nearest place with lights and people. I wait until morning. I wait until the fog clears, because I know what's out there now, what follows and watches and breathes in the darkness above the trees. And I know that next time, it might not just pace me. Next time, it might decide to do more than watch. And there's nothing, no speed, no road, no amount of running, that would save me from something that large. Something that moves like that. Something that treats ancient forests like I treat empty sidewalks. I was lucky once. I matched its rhythm for 20 miles and it let me go. I don't want to find out what happens when the rhythm changes. I've spent 15 years helping people process death. I thought I understood grief. Then I saw Michael's face forming in the fog. Michael, who I couldn't save 3 years ago. And I understood that some grief doesn't process. It waits. I'm a licensed grief counselor, which means I spend my days sitting with people in the worst moments of their lives, helping them navigate loss, helping them find ways to keep living when someone they love has stopped. It's hard work, emotionally exhausting work, but I'm good at it. I have to be. People trust me with their pain, and I take that responsibility seriously. But there are cases that haunt you. Cases where you tried everything and it wasn't enough. Cases where someone slipped through your fingers despite your best efforts. Michael was one of those cases. I was driving to a professional retreat on the San Juan Islands, taking the ferry from Anacortes. It was early December, cold and gray, and I was already burned out before the retreat even started. I'd lost another client 2 weeks earlier, not to suicide this time, but to an overdose that might as well have been intentional. And I was questioning whether I could keep doing this work, whether I had anything left to give. The retreat was supposed to help with that, supposed to provide tools for managing compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. I was skeptical, but desperate enough to try. The fog rolled in somewhere around Fidalgo Island, coming off the water in thick banks that reduced visibility to almost nothing. I slowed down to 30 miles per hour, following the tail lights of the car ahead of me, just trying to make it to the ferry terminal. But then those tail lights disappeared, the car ahead apparently turning off somewhere, and I was alone on Highway 20 with fog so dense it looked solid. Not like normal fog that you can see through eventually, but like a wall, like something with substance and weight pressing against my windshield. I slowed to a crawl, leaning forward, squinting through the white. And that's when I saw the first face. It appeared in the fog directly ahead, faint at first, but growing clearer as I approached. A woman's face, middle-aged, with sad eyes and graying hair. I recognized her immediately. Her name was Sarah, and she'd been my client 4 years ago after her husband died. We'd worked together for 6 months, made real progress, and then she'd stopped coming to sessions. 3 months later, I'd read her obituary. Suicide. I'd gone to the funeral, met her adult children, carried guilt that I still haven't fully processed about whether I could have done more. And now her face was in the fog, watching me. Not threatening exactly, just there, existing in the white vapor with an expression of profound sadness. I blinked hard, told myself it was exhaustion, pattern recognition gone wrong, my tired brain creating familiar faces out of random shapes. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there. And now she was reaching toward my car, her hand extending through the fog like she was trying to touch the windshield. I gasped and hit the brakes, my car sliding slightly before stopping. The face faded as I got closer, dissolving back into formless fog. But I could still feel her presence, still sense her sadness hanging in the air. My heart was hammering, my hands shaking on the wheel. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm my breathing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Grief counselors aren't supposed to see ghosts. We're supposed to be the rational ones, the grounded ones, the ones who help other people navigate their irrational thoughts and magical thinking about death. I started driving again, even slower now. And that's when I saw Michael. His face formed in the fog to my right. Young and anguished, exactly as I remembered him from our last session. 23 years old, brilliant and funny and so desperately depressed that every breath was an effort. We'd been working together for 8 months. I thought we were making progress. I thought he was getting better. And then one Tuesday, he didn't show up for his appointment. Didn't answer my calls. And the next day, his mother called to tell me he was gone, hanging in his apartment, where he'd been alone for 2 days before anyone found him. I'd been to therapy myself after that. Worked through the guilt, accepted that I couldn't save everyone, learned to forgive myself for being human and fallible. But seeing his face in the fog brought it all back with crushing force. The what-ifs. The questions about what I'd missed, what signs I'd failed to read, what words I should have said differently. His face looked at me with the same anguish I remembered, and his mouth moved like he was trying to tell me something. But no sound came through the glass and fog. I wanted to stop, wanted to get out and apologize, wanted to explain that I'd tried, that I'd cared, that losing him had broken something in me that never fully healed. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, if I acknowledged what I was seeing, I'd have to accept that it was real. And I couldn't do that. I was a grief counselor. I helped other people deal with loss. I couldn't be the one falling apart, seeing impossible things, believing in ghosts. More faces appeared as I drove. Jennifer, who'd lost her son and never recovered from it. David, whose partner died in an accident he blamed himself for. Patricia, whose depression had roots so deep we'd never managed to reach them. Client after client, all the ones who hadn't made it, all the ones I'd tried to help and failed. They formed in the fog like photographs developing, watching me pass with expressions of sorrow and longing and something that might have been accusation. I started crying, tears running down my face as I drove through that gallery of loss, past all the people I couldn't save. My professional detachment was gone completely, stripped away by the fog and the faces and the weight of accumulated grief that I'd been carrying for 15 years without fully acknowledging. I'd thought I was processing it, thought I was healthy and balanced and properly self-aware. But I'd just been storing it, packing it down, adding each loss to a pile I never fully examined because examining it meant admitting I couldn't fix everyone, couldn't be good enough, couldn't earn the trust people placed in me. The fog got thicker, the faces more numerous. They pressed close to my car now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, crowding around me in the white. Not all of them were former clients. Some were people I'd known peripherally, friends of friends who'd died, acquaintances who'd struggled. Some were faces I'd seen in obituaries, in news articles about suicide, in the statistics I reviewed during continuing education courses. The fog was showing me everyone, all the lost ones, all the people who died with unfinished business and unresolved pain. I could barely see the road anymore. The faces filled my vision, and I felt the car slowing without my foot on the brake, like the fog itself was applying pressure. I was going to stop. I was going to be trapped here with them, with all this grief made manifest, with every person I'd failed or couldn't help or simply hadn't been enough for. And part of me thought, maybe I deserved that. Maybe this was where I belonged, surrounded by the evidence of my inadequacy. But then I saw a different face. My father's face. He died when I was 19, suddenly, a heart attack that gave us no time to prepare or say goodbye. It was why I'd become a grief counselor in the first place, why I'd dedicated my life to helping people navigate loss. And seeing his face in the fog wasn't sad or accusing. He looked proud. He looked like he was trying to tell me something important, something I needed to hear. I read his lips through the fog. You tried. Just those 2 words. But they hit me like a physical force. You tried. Not you succeeded, not you saved everyone, not you were perfect. You tried. And sometimes trying is all you can do, all anyone can do, even when it's not enough. The fog began to thin. Not quickly, but gradually, the faces fading one by one until only the white remained. And then even the white started breaking up into normal fog. The kind you can drive through, the kind that's just weather and not manifestation. The road appeared ahead of me, and I could see the sign for the Anacortes ferry terminal, just a mile distant. I pulled into the terminal parking lot and sat there for a long time, watching normal fog drift across normal water, listening to normal sounds of seagulls and car engines and ferry announcements. My face was wet with tears, my body exhausted like I'd run a marathon. But something had shifted. Some weight I'd been carrying had become visible, and visible things can be addressed. I didn't go to the retreat. I called and canceled, said I wasn't feeling well, which was true enough. Instead, I drove back home, slowly, carefully, staying away from that stretch of Highway 20. I made an appointment with my own therapist for the next day. And I started the hard work of actually processing my grief, not just intellectually understanding it, but feeling it, acknowledging all the losses that had accumulated over 15 years, accepting that I couldn't save everyone and that trying was enough. I still counsel people through grief. I'm still good at it, maybe better now because I'm more honest with myself and my clients about the limitations we all face. But I'm also more careful about my own mental health, more aware of when I'm storing grief instead of processing it, more willing to admit when I need help. And I don't drive Highway 20 when fog is forecast. Not because I'm afraid of seeing those faces again, exactly, but because I'm not sure I need to. The fog showed me something true about myself, about the weight I was carrying, about the difference between professional competence and personal wellness. Some people might say I hallucinated, that stress and exhaustion created images my brain wanted to see. Maybe that's true. But real or not, those faces in the fog were trying to tell me something important, and I finally listened. Michael's face is still with me, and Sarah's, and all the others. But they're memories now, not ghosts, not accusations. Just sad reminders that a loss is part of life, and helping people doesn't mean preventing all pain. Sometimes it just means sitting with them while they hurt, offering presence instead of solutions, trying even when trying isn't enough. The fog knew that. The faces knew that. And now I know it too. in a way I couldn't before I drove through that wall of grief made visible. I'm grateful I made it through. But I also know that fog waits, that grief accumulates, and that the faces of the lost are always there, just beyond sight, waiting for moments when we're vulnerable enough to see them. I hope I never need to see them again. But if I do, I hope I remember what my father's face told me through the white. You tried. And sometimes, that has to be enough. 43 years ago, I killed a man on this road. It was ruled an accident. Fog, darkness, narrow curves. They never knew I'd been drinking. I left Oregon the next month and never came back. Until tonight. And the fog remembers everything. I'm 71 years old now, retired from logging, living in Idaho where nobody knows who I was or what I did. I built a good life there, raised a family, became a different person than the 28-year-old drunk who drove away from Oregon in 1982 and never looked back. But you can't outrun some things forever. My wife died 6 months ago, and in her final days, she made me promise to make peace with my past. She knew about the accident. I'd told her years into our marriage when the guilt became too much to carry alone. She'd forgiven me, told me I needed to forgive myself. But we both knew that wasn't possible without going back, without facing what I'd done on that road. So here I am, driving Highway 30 along the Columbia River Gorge, in the exact spot where it happened, at the exact time of night it happened, in conditions that are becoming more and more identical to that night 43 years ago. The fog rolled in around Corbett, thick and white and cold, the same kind of fog that had been here that November night in 1979. I'd been working at a mill near Portland, stopped at a bar after shift, had too many beers, and decided to drive home anyway because I was young and stupid and thought I was invincible. The road hasn't changed much. They've improved some sections, widened a few curves, but this stretch near Multnomah Falls is still the narrow, winding route it was back then. The same scenic highway built in the 1920s, the same tight corners and steep drops, the same trees pressing close on both sides. I've looked at pictures over the years, studied maps, kept track of this place from a distance, like a murderer keeping newspaper clippings of his crime. I've memorized every detail of the accident report that was filed, every word of the investigation that concluded it was just an unfortunate incident, driver error by the victim, no charges filed. But I know the truth. I was drunk, I was going too fast, and when he came around that blind corner in his lane like he was supposed to, I was in his lane because I'd misjudged the curve. I saw his face for just a second in my headlights before we hit. Middle-aged man, eyes wide with the realization that he was about to die, and there was nothing he could do about it. The sound of the impact is something I've never forgotten, that terrible crunch of metal and glass, and then silence as his car went over the edge. I stopped. I got out. I looked over the guardrail and saw his car maybe 50 feet down the slope, wrapped around a tree, steam rising from the engine. I stood there for 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. And then I heard sirens in the distance. Someone else must have seen the accident, must have called it in. And I made the worst decision of my life. I got back in my car and I drove away. Left him there dying or already dead. Left him to be found by strangers. Left his family to wonder why and how and to never know the truth. The investigation ruled it an accident. Single vehicle, driver lost control in fog and darkness. Went over the edge. My car had damage, but I told my insurance it was from hitting a deer on a different road, paid the deductible, and kept my mouth shut. Nobody connected the two incidents. Nobody suspected. and a man named Robert Chen, 46 years old, father of 3, was buried without anyone knowing that someone else had killed him and gotten away with it. I'm telling you this not for sympathy but for context. Because you need to understand what I did to understand what's happening to me now on this road. The fog has gotten impossibly thick. The same thickness it was that night. And I'm approaching the same curve, the same blind corner where I killed him. My speedometer shows 35 miles per hour, the same speed I was going then. I didn't consciously choose this speed. My foot just settled into it naturally, like the car remembers, like some part of me wants to recreate that moment exactly. I can feel it in my chest, that same mix of alcohol-dulled reactions and false confidence I had back then. Except I haven't been drinking tonight. I'm completely sober, have been sober for 40 years, stopped drinking the week after the accident and never touched it again. But I feel drunk now. Feel my judgment impaired, my vision slightly blurred, my hands responding too slowly to the wheel. The road is making me feel what I felt that night, putting me back in that state, and I understand with growing dread that this isn't just memory. This is recreation. The curve is ahead. I can see it appearing through the fog exactly as it did 43 years ago. And I know with absolute certainty what I'm going to see around that corner. I want to stop, want to pull over and wait for daylight, for the fog to clear, for this terrible inevitability to release me. But my foot won't move from the accelerator. 35 miles per hour, steady and constant, carrying me toward that corner like the universe has been waiting 43 years for me to come back and complete something I left unfinished. I round the corner, and he's there. Robert Chen in his 1976 Toyota Corolla, coming toward me in his lane, in the right place, doing everything correctly. And I'm in his lane, just like before. Because the car drifted left without me consciously steering it. Because the fog and the road and time itself are forcing me to repeat what I did, to experience it again, to feel what he felt in those last seconds. Our eyes meet through the windshields. His are wide with fear and recognition. Not recognition of me specifically, but recognition of death. Of the moment when you understand your life is ending and there's no escape. And I see something else in his eyes, something that makes my blood freeze. He's not surprised. He's been waiting. This man who died 43 years ago has been waiting on this corner in the fog for me to come back, waiting for the road to bring me here again, waiting for justice or revenge, or simply for the truth to be acknowledged. I wrench the wheel right, trying to avoid him like I should have tried that night, trying to save him this time, even though I know he's already dead. Has been dead for longer than my children have been alive. The car responds sluggishly, too slowly, and I feel the impact again, that terrible crunch. But this time it's different. This time it's my car that's spinning, my car that's heading for the guardrail, my car that's breaking through and going over the edge. I have time to think as I fall, time to understand that the road has been waiting for this. That every year I stayed away was just adding weight to this moment. That some debts can only be paid in exactly the same currency they were created. I'm going to die the same way Robert Chen died. In the same place, in the same fog, at the same age approximately, by going over the same edge. The road is balancing itself, correcting the mistake of letting me escape, ensuring that what should have happened 43 years ago happens now. My car hits the slope and tumbles, glass breaking, metal screaming, my body thrown against the seatbelt. I feel ribs crack, feel my head impact something hard. feel warmth spreading from wounds I can't see. The car comes to rest against a tree. Maybe the same tree, probably the same tree. And I'm trapped. Can't move, can't breathe properly, can taste blood. Through my shattered windshield, I see someone standing at the edge of the road above, looking down. Robert Chen, 46 years old, exactly as he was the night he died. He watches me for a long moment, and I try to say I'm sorry. Try to tell him I've carried this guilt for 43 years. Try to explain that I'm not the same person I was. But he just turns and walks away, disappearing into the fog. And I understand that my apology doesn't matter. Some things can't be forgiven, can only be balanced. The road knew that. The fog knew that. And somewhere deep down, I knew that too, which is why I came back. Not really to make peace, but to pay what I owed, to give the road what it was due, to balance the equation that's been incomplete for 43 years. I hear sirens in the distance, just like that night. Someone must have seen my accident, must have called it in. But unlike that night, there's no escape for me. I'm trapped in my car, bleeding, probably dying, experiencing exactly what Robert Chen experienced while I stood above and made the choice to leave. I wonder if anyone will stop, will come down to help, or if they'll make the same choice I made. I almost hope they don't stop. I almost hope they leave me here, because that would be perfect justice, that would complete the circle. But someone does stop. I hear footsteps on gravel, hear someone calling down, asking if I'm alive, hear them scrambling down the slope. A young guy, maybe late 20s, appears at my window. "Hold on," he says, pulling out his phone. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." And I want to tell him no. I'm not going to be okay. This isn't how it's supposed to work. The road brought me here to die, to balance what I did, to make things right in the only way they can be made right. But he's calling 911. He's talking to me, keeping me conscious, doing everything I should have done 43 years ago and didn't. The universe has given me what I denied Robert Chen, a witness, a helper, a chance. The paramedics arrive, extract me from the car, load me into an ambulance. I survive. Broken ribs, concussion, lacerations, but I survive. And as they're taking me away, I look back at the road through the ambulance windows, and I see him one more time. Robert Chen, standing in the fog, watching. And the expression on his face isn't anger or satisfaction. It's something more complicated, something that might be disappointment or might be understanding. The road tried to balance the scales, but someone else's choice, that young man's decision to stop and help, prevented it. I'm still alive, still carrying the debt. And I understand now that this is the real punishment. Not death, not justice, but living with the knowledge that the road wanted me, tried to claim me, and was prevented. I'll spend whatever time I have left wondering if it will try again, if the fog will call me back, if the road will find another way to balance what I took 43 years ago. I never drove Highway 30 again. But sometimes, on foggy November nights, I wake up convinced I'm in my car on that curve, about to meet Robert Chen's eyes one more time. And I wonder if maybe I did die that night. If maybe the ambulance and the hospital and the years since are just what my brain created in those final moments. A dream of escape from a debt that can never truly be paid. I wonder if I'm still down there in the fog, trapped in my car against that tree, experiencing an endless loop of guilt and failed justice. I wonder if the road has me after all. And everything since is just fog and memory, and the desperate wish that some things can be forgiven when you know they can't. The only thing I know for certain is that the road remembers, and it's still waiting.